The reason that divine femininity is so attractive to so many is because women have been so put down for many, for since the beginning of time, really. A big piece with women, especially coming up in certain settings where we're supposed to be meek, we're supposed to be mild, we're supposed to be pleasing to everybody, have everyone like us, is really taking back ownership of who we are, what our strengths are, what we bring. And I do feel that those are the gifts that God has given to us. So we're really in disservice if we are not acknowledging those parts of ourselves.
No human being can fathom what God has prepared for those who love Him. Seen, heard, imagined.
Wow, I'm just blown away by the number of people who have liked, followed, or even subscribed to Seen, Heard, Imagined. I wanted to take this opportunity to be very clear. Seen, Heard, Imagined is a space where spiritual seekers of all kinds are welcome. While inspired by my Christian faith and scriptures like 1 Corinthians 2:9, this brand isn't confined to one religion. It's for anyone longing to feel spiritually connected, emotionally grounded, and deeply known. Whether you call it God, Spirit, the divine, or you're still searching, this space honors your journey. I'm looking forward to providing you with positive and affirming content and products that connect you with our Creator. Welcome to Seen, Heard, Imagined, the podcast where guests share with us what they have seen, heard, or dreamt up, or even imagined. And this has to do with strengthening their faith in God. And so, as your host, Michelle Francine, I'm going to bring on Jessica Karl. And with Jessica, I'm going to discuss today divine femininity. Can we obtain that from God? Divine femininity. So, Jessica, welcome. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks so much for having me, Michelle. It's so fun to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Jessica, you are the founder of Jessica Rice Coaching, a transformative coaching practice dedicated to helping leaders, entrepreneurs, visionaries, just really about amplifying their influence, aligning with their purpose, and building impactful legacies. And as a certified ICF coach, speaker, and entrepreneur, you combine over 15 years of experience in corporate leadership, business strategy, and design with cutting edge coaching methodologies. And your work has been influenced in the industry with organizations like PayPal and Uber, Airbnb, and Lockheed Martin. Like, you have been so busy. I'm so excited. That's great.
Yes, it's definitely been a journey moving from, I guess, design and software engineering over into coaching. And it's definitely probably the most rewarding thing that I have done in my career so far. I truly enjoy working with people on that level. And it's a little fun to be able to go into to be a bird on the wall or a fly on the wall with some of the things that are happening inside of some of these companies too sometimes.
Yeah. Well, fun fact for the viewers, we have worked together in the past. And so we have both since then, went in different directions and pursued different career objectives. And so it's really kind of a beautiful thing for me to hear that you've landed in a place where you feel like you're living out your purpose and that this is the best career and the best job that you've ever had. So I'm really excited to hear that and happy for you. So I have a question for you. How would you describe divine femininity? Like, what is that? Isn't that kind of like new agey, kind of a secular belief?
The short answer of that would be mostly yes. I would say that most people who are practicing divine femininity are probably doing so from a new age perspective. To be honest, I feel like it's a blend of everything you've ever seen, and then they just kind of put it together, and then it was divine femininity. I'm sure others wouldn't call it that or agree with that. I don't consider myself necessarily to be an expert in that as well. But as I would liken that to where I'm at in my personal journey right now, with God. I would say that I think we can look at divine femininity from an alternate perspective in terms of who we are in Christ, how we show up, how we serve to a greater extent. I think that women for a long time too, the reason that divine femininity is so attractive to so many is because women have been so put down for many, for since the beginning of time, really. So I think that if we can find our voice and we can find our place within what it is that we're looking to do, how we're in service, and how that then aligns with what God has called us to do, and being in honor of that, then that I feel can be a godly sort of divine femininity.
Interesting. Thank you. And can you kind of elaborate on what is it to you? How would you define it now? What does it look like?
I think that really, to be honest, so growing up in the church, I struggled with humility quite a bit. I didn't know how to really acknowledge anything that I was good at or to talk about it. I was taught from a young age that, the gifts that I had, they were good and they were great, but we just didn't, we didn't acknowledge them. And I think that played a huge role in me trying to figure out who I was, and really how to speak about that in a greater way. So I feel like a big piece with women, especially coming up in certain settings where we're supposed to be meek, we're supposed to be mild, we're supposed to be pleasing to everybody, have everyone like us, is really taking back ownership of who we are, what our strengths are, what we bring. And I do feel that those are the gifts that God has given to us. So we're really in disservice if we are not acknowledging those parts of ourselves. And so when we start to align that, that's where I feel like we can really start to bridge that gap in terms of, am I celebrating myself or am I celebrating what God has given me?
Mm-hmm. God, thank you for that. Yeah. Well, tell me about a season in your spiritual journey where you needed to take more responsibility for your own actions. I know that was an aspect of your spiritual journey where you recognize, I really need to take ownership of this in my life to improve that.
Yeah. Um, well, I'll say, as a woman, I think that women we carry quite a bit of the load oftentimes, and we tend to be pleasers. Most of the women executives that I work with, when we talk about saboteurs and we're doing assessments in relation to personality, pleaser is a big piece of that comes in where we're taking on too much. And we don't really have healthy boundaries. We don't know how to say no. And I would say this was very prevalent in my life from an early age, always taking on more and always kind of saying yes to certain circumstances or people that I knew probably weren't the best for me, but I did it anyways. And so, as a survivor of domestic violence, that carried with me even into my marriage. And so, as I started to rise up in my career, things started to get tricky for me. I had a newborn son. I was a software engineer. I was starting to rise up in my company. I was traveling a lot. And it started to really impact my marriage at that time. And there was just a lot of blaming that was taking place in terms of I'm doing all of this and I'm feeling like I'm having to take it all on. And I think when women are more or less the breadwinners as well, we can start to feel like this load is just becoming so heavy. And I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to put some boundaries in place in terms of trying to be everything to everyone. And so after I started to really seek out what could I start to do about this, then I started to go on this other spiritual journey, because I think that when I'd seen therapists in the past or I'd seen other people, it really wasn't very helpful for me to think about some of the context that they would put it into, which is how could I look at it differently when I really just needed to learn how to take control back for myself, how to take control in my life back. And it started with me understanding myself, forgiving myself, and probably even, I wasn't really angry at God, but forgiving for the fact of some of the things that had taken place. and forgiving maybe men in general. And once I could start to do some of this, then I felt like I was able to kind of heal my marriage in a different way, start saying, like, listen, I can't do all of this. And also be able to communicate in a way where it was more of a peaceful conversation versus an attacking, blaming victim kind of conversation.
Right. Yeah. I love that. You mentioned recognizing taking traumas into your marriage as well. And just as a woman, understanding that people pleasing nature, men experience that as well. But I think because women are kind of wear the hat of nurturer, there's an expectation of nurturing, or we just can't help but be that. We have a tendency of having a hard time of articulating needs, articulating, like you said, the boundaries. It's this idea of, if everybody else is okay, then I'm going to be okay. I think that we have a tendency to lead with that. So let me pour into everyone else. And then you mentioned experiences with domestic violence in your past. Gosh, that just compounds the people pleasing. And I imagine that there were probably a lot of triggers that came up, in your marriage as well. A lot of unhealed parts of you or scabs that were picked at. And so I think that's just a really poignant thing to point out. I think that a majority of people are going to experience that, male or female, once they get married. There's some underlying childhood stuff that, if it isn't truly resolved or brought to light, it's going to bubble up in marriage.
Marriage is the kind of playground for uncovering who we truly are, all the messy bits, all the pieces that sometimes it's easy to keep it at bay with everyone else in our lives to a certain extent until you live until you live with somebody and they get to see every aspect of you, good, bad, indifferent.
Yeah, yeah. I posted not too long ago that, marriage really just is not for the weak of heart. If you cannot accept constructive criticism, it ain't for you. It ain't for you. And I was just talking to a girlfriend of mine who just got engaged, and she was just expressing, this is really challenging. Like, she's just only engaged, but she's starting those conversations and talking about expectations and all the things. And, I just told her, I said, if you're not willing to look at yourself in the mirror, it ain't for you. If you're not willing to have difficult conversations, it ain't for you. Like, those are just so foundational. And then let's not skip over the fact that spirituality, that, belief in our creator, our Father God, having that as a foundation is really, really helpful, in my opinion, to having successful, healthy marriages.
I think absolutely. And I think when we can start to really understand, like you mentioned the word expectations, we can have underlying hidden expectations of other people that we assume that they know what we're saying or know what our needs are
Right.
and
Right.
can meet them. And we don't
Yeah.
explicitly ask for them. And I think that I fell into that camp quite a bit. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
women do. I know men do as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
But when we can start to be whole in that way, we can also then grow in our compassion and our gratitude for one another as well. And I think that really does start with a lot of that self work that that's necessary to be done.
Well, tell me about a season in your life where you needed to really start looking at solutions to some of the challenges that were bubbling up. I believe you mentioned that you leaned into what many would classify as new age tools. You looked at crystals and oils and singing bowls, and there were, self-proclaimed psychics that came to you and wanted to open up your akashic records, things like that. Um, what did those tools help with, if they did at that time?
I would say, number one, I think to be clear is when you're trying to figure out how to save your marriage and you're trying to make heads and tails of who you are and why some of the things have occurred to you in your life and struggling, really struggling to find that. And sometimes the advice that we're given isn't incredibly helpful. Can be just just be more forgiving, just be more grateful, could be just lean into God more. I think that's easier said than done when you are going through something and it feels like the burden is so heavy. And I felt like something was wrong with me. I felt broken. I felt broken for a really long time. And I thought that I couldn't be fixed because I would go from very mild, most people see a very mild side, to utter rage. And my husband saw that side and my family saw that side, but other people didn't. And I think I struggled knowing how to handle all of that. So in that process, I discovered coaching. I discovered oils. I don't think oils are something that is any one way or another. It is, it's a property, much like an herb or anything else that we might take. But how things are used, I think, is really what's key. And so in spiritual coaching, other things started to get opened up. And I think that the challenge that starts to come is that there's a lot of ambiguity and gray areas that come in the coaching realm that we specifically see online. So I started to, in that path, once I started to recognize, like, where do I want to be even in my life? I started to love coaching. I wanted to move into that. I was growing a team of my own in corporate, and I wanted to figure out how could I blend more of this work in my life. But I also knew, like, there were pieces that just, they still didn't feel quite right. Um, I think it's easy to get drawn into certain things because it starts to feel like that's the answer. And so affirmations, personal affirmations, I do think they're great, but we have to have some understanding or some foundation to it. You could say singing bowls or crystals or anything. I never once considered it like this. I always struggled, actually. A lot of people that were in the same kind of groups, that I was learning alongside, they would look at the energy of this and where it came from. And I was intrigued because I thought this my whole life, maybe there is something that I'm missing. Only to come to find out, I felt like it really was that Jesus had been calling me back the whole time, but him, truly, him in his true self, his spirit, not what man has made him, not what, a lot of very religious types of people will start to put these barriers around, and rigidity and conformity. And that's truly what I was seeking coming up in the church. I grew up in a very Pentecostal church. There was a lot of rules. There was a lot of, you will go to hell if you feel this way, or you do these things, or you listen to this, or you participate in that. And a lot of it was incredibly fear-based. And so I think that trying to find the love is what I was really after. Trying to find love for myself, love in the world, love in something other than what I had been shown. And in that process, I think that when we are leveraging certain tools, it's important to understand what the intent behind it is. Do I still think that you can use certain things? I mean, there's a lot of people who I know would disagree, don't do yoga because of the intention of yoga behind that. I think it really depends on you. What are you trying to channel in this moment? For me personally, it really was just trying to get closer to God. I just didn't know exactly what to call it because it wasn't the type of God that had been presented to me when I was younger.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's valid and fair. Absolutely. Fear based spirituality, fear based Christianity has really done a number on a lot of people being raised in the church. It has its own tint of trauma that's carried with that experience. Yeah. So I wanted to go back for a second because I thought you said something really poignant. You said that, well, oils is like a property. What about crystals, in your opinion?
I've done a lot of research around this. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but just for my own self. And you're going to find a lot of information out there in the world. And I think, I've followed up on Christian mystics. There's, of course, divine femininity that comes in and taking the Gnostic Bible and oils and crystals and singing bowls. And again, if you're worshiping it, then maybe there's something to consider there. If you're not, then, you know, what is it? There are studies that are done in relation to hertz. I've looked into that. You can also look at solfeggio frequencies. You can look at Gregorian monks, and you can understand different frequencies and how that how that impacts us. Again, I feel like there's tools out there. If you're looking to draw closer to God, then, I listen to the Hollow app, and there's Gregorian monk chants in there that I listen to while I'm praying as well. I think it matters and how you're using it. It's a tool. If it brings you closer, if it gets you into a place of calm, then maybe it's beneficial for you. When I was talking to a friend of mine, we were talking about how, looking at numbers, walking barefoot on the ground, and grounding techniques. If we really truly believe that God created everything, then he created it all here for us. And I had this realization one day, as I felt like with the new age movement, what happened was they basically took all the gifts that I felt God gave us, and they just stripped him out. And then they slapped on something else. But if you consider walking outside barefoot and getting connected with the earth that God created, I don't think that it's really any different. It's just your intention and what it is that you're trying to do.
Wow, that was a really good point you made. And that really resonates with me. I agree. I agree. I personally have, a couple of crystals laying around my studio. And we just bought a grounding mat that we sleep on every night. And I've seen improvement, frankly. Um, and then I even, have some of your oils. There was a season in which you were distributing these oils as well. And so for me, I've drawn a very similar conclusion. Are we worshiping these objects and tools to give us all the answers? If so, I personally believe that we're not going to be satisfied and that they operate as just purely band aids. So, to your point about intentionality, when you're turning to these things, is your intention to also have a communication and conversation with God? Are you appreciating this stone? Are you appreciating this grass, this tree? Are you appreciating these oils? Are you appreciating that someone who might be sensitive or psychic, are you appreciating that they might actually be telling you something that is a message that you've intuitively know God has planted in your heart already before? I also believe I as of right now, I really believe that things like crystals, oils, things that are created in nature, it wouldn't surprise me if Jesus Christ himself channeled these things to do some of the miraculous things he did. He and our Father, like you said, are the creators of these various objects. And I believe there is power in these objects that come out of the ground and out of the earth. There's power and energy in everything that he has created. The man-made stuff is what's questionable, right? Yeah, so last question for you. Although I might be lying, there might be a couple more. How does God help us create that divine feminine energy that many women seek these days?
I think when I was growing up, a lot of the ways that we were talking about women was how to be more subservient. And so for a very long time, I carried that with me. Like, to be godly was to be a doormat, was to be the one who kept the house clean, who made everyone happy and cooked meals and, smiled her way through it. And I never really embodied that. So I didn't understand how women actually were able to do that, because I do have a fiery side.
You do, just a little
A
bit. Yeah.
little bit. It comes out here and there. So in this whole, kind of search that I went through, really in finding myself, finding my way back to God, there was this point recently that I was reading, and a bit of my backstory too. I had been ill for a really long time and had had a couple emergency surgeries. I'd had a gastric perforation, and so that caused some complications. And I had a lot of bleeding that had happened for many years. So I was reading Mark chapter 5, verse 21. And in there, he has two moments that are very distinct in the Bible that don't really show up anywhere else. One is there's a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years who touched his robe, and he could tell right away that she touched him. There's someone had touched him and had taken some of his power. And he's asking who, and it's very crowded, but she admitted, and she was healed instantly. And he called her daughter. Now, nowhere else in the Bible does he ever call another woman daughter. And then right after this, he goes to heal a little girl who, they think is dead, and he's telling them, no, she's not, and for sure. And he says, Talitha cum, which is rise up, little girl. Now, there's some different variations on, the Aramaic of that, but when I read that, I just started crying because I realized for the first time that I am God's daughter. I never looked at myself like that before. I never looked at myself as belonging to him. I looked at myself as maybe he made me, maybe I had some things. I didn't understand a lot of the things that had happened in my life, but I never looked at it like that. And once I did, I felt like I belonged. I felt like he truly was my father. I think there's words sometimes we say these things, but we don't mean much.
Sure.
And so for the first time, I feel like when we're thinking about who we are in our divinity in relation to God or in relation to our faith, it's really who we are in him. Now, I'm not going to argue about the him and the hers and what is God, because I honestly don't know. I don't feel like I can begin to answer some of these questions in depth. My son asks me these questions and hurts my mind sometimes. But I'm like, I don't know. Celebrating who we are in him as his daughters, and as we are, as women are to be the bride, right? The church is the bride, women are the bride. Then I think that we can start to really look at ourselves as the gifts that I truly feel that he intended us for to be. And if we can honor that, and the gifts, like you mentioned earlier, if someone's saying something to you, sometimes, again, when I hear other people saying, well, I'm getting a download from the universe, I think God speaks to us in a lot of different ways. And it's just a matter of how we're paying attention. And he's given people gifts. And if we're aware of how we steward those gifts, that's really important. So I don't like to throw everything out, but I also like to have discernment. And there's going to be people with good intentions, and there's going to be people with not good intentions. And so having that discernment that he brings is really key. But I think if we're thinking about divine femininity, it's not celebrating me. And the biggest challenge that I had with all of the way that it's taught in the New Age movement is that celebrating myself never brought any kind of fulfillment. Me saying I am wonderful. It's good to have reminders from a neuroscience perspective. What I work with clients around, we're constantly having to demonstrate to our mind alternative ways of looking at things. But I think it's really important too that we recognize when we can be external to ourselves. If we're so focused on ourselves and in ourselves and of ourselves, we are never satisfied. When we can put it outside of ourselves and how we give, how we help others, how we are, demonstrating the fruits that he has given us, that's where we bring meaning into our lives. That's where we have gratitude. That's where we're most fulfilled and happy, because we're doing things not of ourselves. And I think that whole selfish nature that starts to come in, that's really the key. That's the problem. And they're celebrating themselves. I don't know if that ever brings true fulfillment.
You mentioned how you're raised in the church and how they projected a woman's role in marriage. And, you mentioned, that looks kind of like being a doormat. And probably the definition of submission was not probably fully articulated at your church, I'm guessing. We might not have gotten to the part where the husbands are to die to, the bride, just like Christ died for, we probably skipped over those things. I'm going to make an assumption here. What are your thoughts if you have spent any time in Proverbs 31? We talk about the Proverbs 31 woman and all the things that woman embodies. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Well, I can't recall the scripture at the moment, so you've caught me there. um, but I would say recently I was in another group of Christian women, and we were talking about how to really rise up and be strong and courageous and bold. I don't think that we were really designed to be meek, but we can carry quite a load. And I think it's important to have partnership, to have mutual respect, to celebrate, if you're talking about a spouse, to celebrate each other's, like what you both bring to the relationship. And if you are able to do so in such a way where it's not about I'm the woman and therefore I must have this role, and you're the man and therefore you must have this role, and we can kind of more so look at it like how do we complement each other? How do we complete one another? And how do we show up for one another and be each other's strength in some of these moments? Um, then that changes the dynamic, that changes the dialogue in relation to what this kind of subservient woman is supposed to be, as opposed to an empowered woman. And sometimes I know in my career, it was hard to go from a career that was very masculine and come home and then be
Feminine
mild
in your
natured.
femininity. Yeah. Being in your
You
feminine
know,
energy. Yeah.
yeah, I was fighting
Mm-hmm.
fires all day long and arguing and dealing
Right.
with challenges. And so
Right.
sometimes it was hard to turn that off. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's too where we start to lean into God and what is it that He wants for us, and what is it that He's hoping to channel, I say, through us in
Mm-hmm.
various aspects. And I try to work on this now with my son to a greater extent. I homeschool, so
Mm-hmm.
what can I do better each day um, that will help me to be the type of woman I feel like that God has made. And that's not a weak person, that's a strong person.
You know what? Believe it or not, you just articulated the Proverbs 31 woman. This is a woman who happens to have her own business. She is kind and gentle to her own servants. Her husband sits at the city gates, and her husband praises his wife at those gates. There's that support system there and an acknowledgement of what she brings to the table. She gets up, she feeds her family. She finds way to make money, save money. She is strategic. She is thoughtful. And it's a lot. When you look through that particular chapter, it's a lot that she does. But she manages it all with just grace and humility and softness. Somehow, she, to me, embodies that divine feminine energy. So, yeah, thank you for that. That was, you got it spot on. You got it spot on. But yeah, this was a really good conversation. Like, I love this. And you already know I can sit and talk with you for days. For days. Now, before we go, though, do you mind me telling you a prayer that my previous guest had for you?
No, please.
So, my previous guest says that in your speaking and storytelling, they hope that you are filled with the Spirit so that anyone listening to you on the other end will have a knowing that the Lord speaks through you and that the message is intentionally for them. This guest prays that you will seek our Creator every day with confidence and gusto, she says. How does that sit with you? How does that resonate with you?
No, that sits very well. And I love that. In fact, this morning I was praying that I didn't know fully what to say. I don't normally talk about these conversations,
Same, not publicly,
you
that's for
know,
sure. Yeah.
but I wanted whatever to come forth that it's the message that God would want, and I'm just the vessel. So I hope that's what came through, and I appreciate that because as I continue to move forward, that is always my prayer.
Yeah, I love that. Well, do you have a prayer well wish for the next guest that I can share with them?
I think my prayer would be is that they can find strength in the Lord for the courageous spirit that He brings to boldly declare what it is that He has set forth for their life and what it is that they are there to share, what the message is, what they're there to help bring forth in someone else.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Now, how can people get to know you, your products, and services?
The best way, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me at Jessica Karl Rice or Instagram or Facebook at Jessica Rice Coaching or my website, Jessica Rice Coaching. Those are the easiest ways.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Jessica. I appreciate your time and your energy and also your vulnerability as well. That's just, yeah, that's awesome and impactful. And just being someone who has lived several years with you in the context of both career and personal life. I was at their wedding, y'all. I was at their wedding. It was a beautiful wedding. It feels good to connect on this level. And I think we need to do that more often. So thank
I
you.
agree. Well, I appreciate you having me come on and share. Thank you for creating this space as well. I think it's an important conversation, and I love how it's very open.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Take care. Do you or someone you love need the power of prayer? Is there a challenge you're facing that only our Creator can help you overcome? Then share it with this community by leaving a comment below this video or using our contact form on the Seen, Heard, Imagined website to share it privately. I'd love to pray for you, have others encourage you, or even send you a personalized prayer to address your unique situation. Thanks for watching and listening.